If you're interested in making a detailed platformer just like this one, within Gamemaker, using drag and drop, then keep watching. G'day gamers, and welcome back to our drag and drop platformer series. In the previous tutorial, we added a way for the player to take damage from the enemy, and our game is really starting to take shape. One of the things that makes a game feel good is what we refer to as juice. Now, juice is how the game feels and how it looks, and just the feeling you get from the experience you have with it. Now, in order to give our game some more juice, today we're going to add a dust effect, and that looks like this. When we jump, we get some dust, and when we land, then dust is generated as well. Now, when we move and we jump and land, the dust has a horizontal move as well, and also it just gives it a little bit of a better feel. Now, the other effect that we're going to add is when we jump on the enemy, we get a little explosion happening just to show the impact. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is go down to the description and download the resources folder. And inside you'll find a dust.gif file. Let's drag that in. Now this is 2 frames or 2 sub-images, and we will just select one so that we get some variety in our dust. I'm going to set the speed to 0, and I'm going to set the middle center as the origin. Now let's close that down and let's create an object. It's going to be called O_dust, and let's make sure we assign the sprite, and let's add a create event. Now if you remember, the dust, it faded out and it also shrunk in size. So they're the 2 things we want to control in the object. So let's drag across an assign variable, and we're going to assign a variable to control the alpha. Now an object has a variable called image alpha, and that controls how opaque the object is. An image alpha goes from 0 to 1, with 0 being completely invisible. So we want to decrease that image alpha value over time, and it'll make it look like the object is fading out. So I'm going to create a variable called alpha decrease, or alpha DEC, and I'm going to set it to minus 0.03. And that is how much we will decrease the alpha per step. Now the object also scaled down over time. So let's have a scale underscore decrease, or DEC, and I'm going to use a function here to set it between 2 variables. I'm going to use random underscore range, and I'm going to set it between the lower range of minus 0.02, comma, up to minus 0.001. Now it's not a big range, but doing that will give some variety between the various instances of dust. Now we want to control the scale when the object starts, so they all don't start at the same scale. Now an object has vertical and horizontal scale. So let's set a temporary variable, and I'm going to call it scale, and we're going to set a random value here too, so random underscore range, and it's going to be between 0.5 and 1. Now the reason we do it that way is we want the scale to be the same amount for the vertical scale and the horizontal scale. So now we can go here and we can set our horizontal scale, and we'll set it to scale, and we want to also set the vertical scale, and we want to set that to scale. So that'll keep the object in proportion. Now I want to also do something else. I want to control which frame is chosen. Remember, there are 2 frames for this sprite. So let's add another one, and we're going to choose a different image index. Now image index is which frame is chosen, so we wanted to have it either 0 or 1. So if you've got 2 values you want to choose between, you can do that a few ways. You can use the function choose, and you type 0, 1, and that will work. You can also use the choose code block. So I could drag that down here, and I could set option 1 as 0, and another option to be 1, and we can target the value of image index directly, image underscore index. So that is the same as what's happening here. You can also set it to a temporary variable and then assign it to image index this way. Obviously you'd need this above to do that. So there's lots of ways to do it. Lastly, you can also say irandom1, and that's probably the simplest way to do it. Irandom will choose an integer value, and when you use random or irandom, it'll go from 0 up to the value that you've chosen. So irandom will now let us choose 0 or 1. And lastly, I'm going to rotate the image. So let's go look at image rotation, and let's set that between a random value up to 360. So now that we've set our variables, we need to decrease them over time. So let's add a step event, and as you know, that will run every step of the game. Now first, let's go and set our horizontal scale. And we want to decrease it by our variables that we created, which are scale decrease. And make sure you tick relative so that it decreases it by this amount per step. So let's just click the plus and do the same for the vertical scale. So that's going to be by scale decrease, and that's going to be relative. So we also need to decrease our alpha to make it fade out. So let's click the plus, go down to image alpha, and we want to decrease it by alpha decrease. And that is once again relative. Now image alpha will only let us see the object when it's above 0. So when it gets below 0, we need to destroy the instance. You have to clean up and make sure you destroy instances when they leave the room or when they're not used anymore. Otherwise you'll have a problem with your resources. Now we can do this a few ways. We can go and get the instance variable of image alpha, and we can set it to a temporary variable, say IA temp, and then we can check if IA is less than or equal to 0, and if it is, we can destroy the instance. So that's one way of doing it. Image alpha is also known as image underscore alpha, and there it is there. So doing it this way, you don't actually need this check. We're just checking the image alpha directly. Some people prefer to do it that way. Some actually prefer to leave this get instance and then check it this way. Look, I'm happy for you to do it either way you want to do. I actually am more comfortable with typing it out because it does help you prepare for GML maybe later on. So I'm going to remove this and I'm just going to check it directly. So now that we've created the dust and we have a way for it to be destroyed, we need to create it in the game. So if we go look at our player and we go to our step event, in the air is where we want to create it. So when we land, we create a dust instance at that point. So in the air state, after we've checked the ground and we've checked our state, we can then do another check here and say if we're on the ground, then we can create the dust. So let's drag across an if variable check. Just place it under our check state, and we're checking for on underscore ground, which if you recall is a variable that we set when we are on the ground. So if that is equal to true, then we want to create the dust. Now because we're going to create the dust when we land and when we jump, I don't want to do it twice, so we will put it inside a script. So let's go execute script, and the script's going to be called scr underscore create underscore dust. So I'm going to take a copy of that. And the reason I didn't just call it create dust is because I might want to use that as a variable later on, and you can't have a variable the same name as a script. So let's right click on scripts, say create, paste that in, and now we can create our script. Now I don't just want to create one dust item, I want to create a few. So we can use the repeat function. So if you type repeat, there is a loop there, and repeat will do something inside the code here however many times you nominate. So let's set it to I random underscore range between 3 and 6. So I will do an integer, remember? So it'll be either 3, 4, 5, or 6. So let's declare a variable of where we want to create it. Now I'm going to set a temporary variable of XX, and I'm going to set it to random range between -20 and 20. So this will let us create it anywhere from the X of the player, 20 this way and 20 this way. Now let's do the same. Let's declare a Y. So got a Y between random range of say -10 and 5. So we're creating a rectangle where it'll be created within that area somewhere. Now let's create the instance, and the object we're creating is odust. Now we're creating it at our XX, but make sure it is relative because it's X plus this. And then for our Y, I'm going to create it at bbox bottom which is the bottom of the player's mask, and then we want to say plus YY. So we'll add this on to the value of the bottom of the mask. It is not relative because this value, just like Y, is a number in the room. Now for the layer, I'm going to create a special layer called dust. So let's go create that now. So just above player, I'm going to add a new layer, click on it, press F2 and call it dust. Now we also want to create it when we actually do the jump and not just when we land. So let's go into our check jump script, and after we've created our jump, we can drag across and execute script, and all we have to do is select the script we made and the dust will be created. So that's a great thing about adding it to a script, we can reuse it. So let's press play and let's have a look at our dust. So now when we land, we generate dust, and when we jump, we get some dust as well. Great, that's looking really good. Now one thing is, when we are moving and we make a jump, the dust just sort of sits there. It doesn't really have any personality. It just doesn't follow us or do anything. So I would like to add some horizontal movement when we make a jump if we're moving. So let's close that down. Let's go to our dust object and let's create a variable. And I'm going to call this dust HSP initial. So the dust horizontal speed initial. I'm just going to set it to 0.5. Now let's go into our script for creating it. Now when the player is standing still, we don't want to create dust, only when we have horizontal movement. And the direction we want it to move is the direction the player is going, and remember the player has a facing variable, so we can use that to know which way the player is moving. Now after we created the dust, we can tick this temporary variable, and I'm going to give it a target of INST. So what that means is once we create this instance, the ID is stored in this variable, and we can use it to access that instance and change things just for that instance. Now this is really powerful, and it's something that you should use a lot because it's very handy. So let's do a check here after we've created it, and remember we're running this script from within the player, so we can look at the player's HSP, their horizontal speed. We can say if that is not equal to 0, that means the player is moving. And if they are moving, we want to take the position or the direction they're moving and give it to the dust. So we're going to assign a variable. Now we want to change the horizontal speed of the instance that's created, and that is the inst. We can access the inst by saying inst dot, and then anything we type after this will be referring to this instance because we called it that name. Now objects have built-in speed variables. They are called hspeed and vspeed, horizontal speed and vertical speed. Now Gamemaker's objects have hspeed and vspeed built into them, and if they are set to values, the object will move at that speed per step. So there's no way to stop them moving unless you set the hspeed or vspeed to 0. And that's why I don't use them for our movement. We want to control it better, so we use our created HSP and our VSP variables instead. But it's good to know that an object can be controlled with these variables as well. So I'm going to set the int.hspeed variable, and I'm going to set it to the variable we created, which was dust underscore HSP initial. Now remember, this variable was created inside the dust object. So we also need an inst.here because this variable belongs to the dust object. Now I'm going to times it by the facing direction, which is the facing direction of the player, and that'll enable it then to move the direction the player is moving. Now this is quite complicated. I'm not saying this is an easy thing to remember, but I've got to make sure I drag that up here as well. What we want to make sure we're doing is understanding what's happening here. Now if this is a little bit complicated, you can do it another way. You can use the apply to. So if I just go here and I apply it to, I type in the expression of inst. So now we're now applying things to the inst object, and we can go and do what we're used to, which is setting instance variables. So we can go down here and we can set our horizontal speed to be dust underscore HSP initial times facing. Now remember, we are inside the dust object when we're down here, so facing belongs to the player, not the dust object, so we'd need to type other.facing. And when you're using an apply to, other will refer to the object that's running it. So the concept is a little bit complicated. I hope you understand what I'm saying here and how it works, but you can do it with this method or you can do it with this single line. Either one would do the same thing. So this one here or this will do the same thing. But understanding how it works is actually really important. So I'm going to close this one. I'm just going to use this where I'm setting the H speed directly and I'm setting it to the dust HSP initial variable and the facing of the player. So let's test that out. So now when we jump, you'll see our dust moves in the direction that the player is moving, and it just makes it feel a little bit more alive. So the other thing you can do is slow it down over time. So let's go back to our dust object and let's have another variable, and I'm going to call this dust underscore slowdown. I'm going to set it to 0.99. Now in our step event, let's slow it down using that. So go in here and we'll say that if our H speed, so if our horizontal speed is not equal to 0, then we want to slow down. So I'm going to drag across a set instance variable and I'm going to set the horizontal speed to be whatever our H speed is times by that dust slowdown variable. So what that means is we're getting basically 99% of whatever HS speed is, because we set it to 0.99 just here. We're taking 99% of our H speed per step. So it's slowing down over time. So let's have a quick look. So now it's very minor. You can change that if you want it to slow down more, but it just makes it not follow at the player's speed of 1. It's just a little bit more subtle. So let's now add the vertical dust. So back where we created our dust, let's now do the same for our vertical speed so that when we jump, we give our dust a little bit of elevation. So we're doing the same check here. We're saying if our VSP of our player is less than 0. And what that means is less than 0, if you remember, means we're moving up. So if it's less than 0, we are moving up, we're jumping. In that case, we want to assign our variable. I'm going to take a copy of this one and paste it here and make sure it's under there. And we're just changing our V speed and our dust V speed initial. Now for the V speed, you've got to make sure we remove the facing because we don't want to times it by facing. We're always going to be moving up and we need to set this dust VSP initial. So let's go to our dust object. Let's create the variable. I'm going to call it dust VSP initial. Now we need to set it at a negative value. So negative 0.05 because negative will mean it's moving up. So we need to slow down that vertical speed over time, just like we did with the horizontal. So just here we want to add a check, and we say if our V speed is not equal to 0, then we can take a copy of this instance variable check, paste it here, and we want to check our vertical speed, and we want to slow our VSP speed down by dust slowdown. So let's play that. So now we should have our game running with all our dust effects in action. So when we jump, we get our dust rising. If we stand still and jump, it rises, and this way as well. And also we get that nice horizontal movement with a little bit of a slowdown. So when you jump, you really notice it slow down a bit. You can change that 0.99 to something less, and you'll get more dust slowdown. That's up to you. Now the next thing I wanted to add was that jump on head effect. So let's drag in the sprite for that. So the sprite is just our explode ring. I'm going to drag that in. and we want to center the origin on this one. So let's go and create an object. I'm just going to call it O_explode ring. Let's assign the sprite and add a create event. Now this is working the same as what we did with the dust. We set a horizontal scale, we increase it, we decrease the alpha so it fades out, so it's all going to be very familiar. So let's add our horizontal scale change. We're going to add a temporary variable. I'm going to call it scale, and we're going to set it to 0.01. Then we're going to set our horizontal scale to be value of scale, and also our vertical scale to be the value of scale. Now you could have just entered this here and here, but if you're doing this for a lot of variables, now we just change this and it changes for both of them. So it's sort of a better way to do it. Now let's also assign some variables for our alpha. So we're going to have our alpha decrease, and I'm going to set it at -0.1. Now for this one we want to increase the scale, so I'm just going to call it scale increase so we know that that's the way it's going, and I'm going to call it 0.05 as the value. So let's add a step event now, and let's set our instance variable of our horizontal scale to be that scale value increase, and we're going to do it relatively to make sure that it grows over time. So let's add the vertical as well, and that's going to be scale increase. Make sure you check relative. And lastly, we want to change the alpha. So let's go down to our image alpha, and let's make that alpha decrease, and make sure you click relative. Now we need to destroy this object when the alpha is below 0, just like we did with the other one. So let's do a check here, and we'll say if our image_alpha is less than or equal to 0, then we want to destroy the object. Now we need to go and create the object. So let's go into our player and the collision with the enemy. So in here is where we can create it, because we know that is where we jump on the enemy's head. So let's go up here. And right here we're applying variables to the enemy. Let's create our instance here. And the reason I want to do it here is I want to use the bbox top of the enemy to create the effect at. So we're going to create O-ring explode. It's going to be 0 relative for our X, but it's going to be bbox top for our Y. And I'm going to create another layer here. It's going to be called FX. And let's just go and create that above the player. So we can use this for various effects that we want to show. I also drag that above the dust. Alright, so let's press play and see what that looks like. So now when we jump on an enemy's head, we get a nice little effect, and we get our dust as well. So it's just adding so much more to the game. Now that's looking great. If you've enjoyed this, remember I have a Udemy course which is based on GML, but it's about making a tile-based platformer, and it has a lot of effects and graphics, and you learn how to put a menu in and a high score and a lot of other things that are basically making it a complete game. You can check out the link in the description. There's a special coupon code that gives you over 90% off. Currently that course is the highest rated Gamemaker 2 course on Udemy. So check it out. It might be something you're interested in. So thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you next time.